Hello and welcome to today's webinar. It's your ultimate guide to phishing mitigation, brought to you by KnowBe4 and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is David Davis, and I'm excited to be your moderator on today's event. Now, before we jump into it, just a few little housekeeping items that we need to cover. First off, we want this to be a very educational event, so use that questions box there in the GoToWebinar control panel. Ask all your questions about phishing. And we have our expert from KnowBe4 on, who I'll introduce in just a moment, to answer all those questions. We'll do a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the event, so I'll be queuing up the questions throughout this really excellent presentation we have planned for you today. We also have a couple really valuable handouts there in the GoToWebinar control panel. One of them is the 23 red flags to look for, and the other one is the ultimate guide to phishing mitigation. So make sure you check out those handouts and download those for yourself. You can just do that right now with a simple click. And then finally, we have a $300 Amazon gift card to hand out to one lucky attendee on today's live event. We'll announce that prize winner just before our Q&A session at the end of the event. If you're watching this event on demand, I'm sorry, the drawing has already occurred. Full prize terms and conditions can be found at events.actualtechmedia.com. And without further delay, I'm excited to introduce today's expert presenter. That is Mr. Roger Grimes. Roger is a data-driven defense evangelist at KnowBe4. Roger, thanks for being on.
Thanks a lot, David. Appreciate it. As David said, I'm the data-driven defense evangelist at KnowBe4. I've been doing computer security for 32 years, earned all those gray hairs, and worked for a lot of different companies previously, including Foundstone, McAfee, and Microsoft. I've written 11 books now and over 1,000 magazine articles, a lot of them for InfoWorld and CSO magazines. I've been their weekly security columnist since 2005. So if you hate that guy, I'm that guy. There are some of my books. The data-driven computer security defense book was my last book. It's been highly rated, and Hacking the Hacker was the one before that. Now I'm working on one called on quantum computing, called the Quantum Day of Reckoning, the day when quantum computers will break public key crypto and how you can prepare. But I've been working for KnowBe4 for a while, and I love KnowBe4. It's been my favorite place. They are the world's most popular and biggest security awareness training vendor. We, social engineering and phishing is responsible for the vast majority of malicious data breaches, and KnowBe4 helps train your employees so they don't get phished. So it's a pretty good marriage for both of us. Today's presentation, though, is about all things phishing and phishing mitigation. A lot of the talks that I've done for KnowBe4 and in the past were kind of about niches, how to do something very specific, sometimes technical. But I decided I really needed to cover like all the things you can do, because a lot of times people come to me about questions that I didn't cover in the other more specific talks. So this talk is more general, more comprehensive. It's about creating a defense in-depth plan. We're not going to go into anything in insane details. Matter of fact, I think we have 89 or 90 slides to cover in the next 15 minutes. There's no way I can cover all the slides. I'm going to pop through some of them kind of fast. But it is an attempt for you to see what I think is all the comprehensive things you should do to fight phishing, including the training, the technical controls, the policies, and things like that, how to implement fantastic security awareness training, and other real-life hints that people have taught me along the ways. But again, it's just to kind of give you a general exposure to all the different things you could be doing and to help you close any critical gaps that you see or things that you think might be missing. And if you have any detailed questions afterwards, feel free to email me at rogerg@knowbe4.com, and I will always get back to your questions within 24 hours. But again, the whole reason for this talk is that the biggest initial breach root cause for most companies is social engineering and unpatched software, and it's social engineering by far. Social engineering has been the #1 way that companies are breached for the last 7 years. It accounts for 70 to 90% of all malicious data breaches. Unpatched software accounts for about 20 to 40%. Sometimes they're used in conjunction with each other. Everything else only adds up to typically 1 to 10% of all malicious data breaches. And a lot of times just 1%. So you really have to tackle these two big causes, social engineering, phishing and unpatched software, if you want to significantly reduce the risk of security incidences in your environment. And you can do that using the different preventative controls. You can do it technically or with training. neither one of them are going to be successful on their own, but what you want to try to do is pick the right combination of both types of controls and do them as best you can. And with that, you can get the best bang for the buck, decrease in risk. So we're going to start by talking about how to develop a comprehensive defense in-depth plan that includes policy and documentation, selection and implementation of technical controls, about the type of training you should be doing. A lot of people weren't sure what type of training they should be doing. We've got the data. We know what type of training you should be doing, and other security checks, and even talk briefly about cybersecurity insurance, which is becoming very popular and more popular. So we're going to start again with policies, because if you don't have the policies, you can't enforce the procedures and the things that people need to do. Everybody should already have an acceptable use policy. If you don't, you need to make one up. But an acceptable use policy is this general computer security awareness document that every user should read and then sign and say that they understand. They should read and acknowledge and sign it annually thereafter. The policies and things that it contains are more general in nature. Then you should have specific phishing mitigation policies, and that again is because phishing and social engineering is the #1 threat against most environments, and that should be, you know, highly documented, include lots of education, include simulated phishing testing. It should be more specific, and users should have to be, you know, see those policies or be tested on those policies more frequently, at least once a month. And of course, you should have lots of training docs and content to help you along that pathway. So starting again with the acceptable use policy, this is something all users and also your vendors. A lot of people don't think about this, but if you interface with a vendor that has access to your network or your data, they should also read and acknowledge and sign your acceptable use policy. And again, it's more general in nature. It's going to say things about, you know, you have to use passwords or use strong and long passwords. You know, if you walk away from your computer screen, you know, it should be locked. Your hard drive should be encrypted. You should not give out your password to people. Well, it should also include information about phishing as well, or how to fight phishing. If you do not have an acceptable use policy, there's a lot of examples out there on the internet. I include a link to one here. That's a pretty good example. They're usually multiple pages long, and again, more general in nature, just trying to cover kind of the heavy hit items. You're like, don't give your password away. You know, and your password should not be used on other websites, and you should lock your screen, and you should encrypt your hard drives and things like that. What's missing on most acceptable use policies is a specific phishing mitigation section. So, you know, if phishing again is the #1 threat in most environments, and it is, well, we need to make sure that we introduce, you know, besides introducing hard drive encryption and password and locking your screen, we need to make sure that we introduce phishing and how to fight phishing right within the acceptable use policy, so everybody gets a little piece of it right from the very beginning. Most of the acceptable use policies that I see, not only in real life, but all the examples on the internet, don't include anything about phishing and how to fight phishing. That's, you know, kind of crazy. So you want to make sure that you include some major elements of how you fight phishing. You know, you want to define phishing, talk about what phishing is and how users should not, you know, just willy-nilly click on things and things like that. You want to introduce just the bare basics in your acceptable use policy, but you want to cover it for sure. You also want to have an employee monitoring section. You know, a lot of the state and national and GDPR laws say, you know, European Union GDPR laws say that you cannot monitor employees without notifying them that you monitor them. A lot of times when you do simulated phishing, if you do a simulated phishing test and then you look to see whether the person passed or failed that particular test, that would be considered monitoring in many laws. So you want to make sure that your acceptable use policy tells employees that, hey, we're going to monitor you, and it may need to include some information. We may do simulated phishing tests and look at the results of those tests, just so that, you know, you don't employ. It's always good for employees to know what's happening, and it will cover you legally. You want to make sure that the user's aware of it. Then you also want to have specific phishing mitigation policies that go, you know, far beyond the general accepted user policy. And you want to always, you know, have a section that talks about why you have specific phishing mitigation policies. You know, that your organization recognizes that phishing and social engineering is one of the most popular ways any organization can be compromised. Include examples of what can happen if people get compromised through a phishing or social engineering attack. You know, that people can get unauthorized system access, create a denial of service event, steal data, could cause reputational issues, could be attacks against employees and customers. They could steal intellectual property, could result in fines and financial harm to the organization. This may already be in your general security policy, but if not, you know, you want to let people know what you want to make them care and know why that they should care about fighting phishing and social engineering. And you do want to, in your specific phishing mitigation guides, include specific definitions about what is phishing, what is social engineering, what is patching, what is CEO fraud, and that sort of stuff. What's ransomware? What's spear phishing? I'm surprised about every second or third presentation I give, and I give usually a couple a week, I'll have a person come up to me afterwards or send me an email going, hey, what is phishing? And I kind of laugh and chuckle because, you know, I'm like, hey, the whole talk was about phishing. How did you not understand what phishing is? And we kind of think that everybody knows generally what phishing is. But the truth is there are people out there that are embarrassed to say that they don't know. So make sure you include those definitions of what social engineering and phishing and spear phishing and ransomware and wire fraud are. And smishing, maybe that's SMS-based phishing, and vishing is voicemail phishing. Even patching. I have a lot of people tell me, what did you mean by patching? What did you mean by updating? You know, excuse me, you need to make sure that you cover all those basic definitions. One of my favorite ways to describe phishing is that it's a process of attempting to acquire sensitive information such as usernames, passwords, and credit cards, or to create a desired action that goes against the victim or their organization's interest by masquerading as a trustworthy entity. Or I tell people, hey, it's a con. It's somebody with criminal intent trying to get you to do something they can use against you or your company. Again, make sure that your documentation always includes the appropriate definitions so everybody gets on a common understanding of what phishing and spear phishing and wire fraud is and that sort of stuff. You also want to always include in your specific phishing mitigation policies the ways that any employee should be able to recognize social engineering. At KnowBe4, we call them, phishing red flags, but you want to tell people to look at, unexpected subjects or strange email addresses or email and URL links that do not tie to each other. It says it's from Apple, but it really isn't from Apple. Matter of fact, you want to make sure you teach every employee how to hover over the links. If they can, you can't always do that like on a cell phone. You can't hover over a link, but you want to teach employees, and I'll cover this a little bit further in more detail later on, but you want to teach every employee as best you can how to recognize a rogue URL that's doing something bad. You want to let people know that there's going to be bad people trying to request their logon credentials or system passwords or to run Trojan files and things like that. So we even have this cool little poster called Social Engineering Red Flags. Anybody that belongs to KnowBe4 can get this poster, and if you email me, I will send you this poster. But you can use that within your organization. But it's kind of a nice one pager that you can print up and send to employees or print up and put around your company that says these are the things that you should look for that might communicate that there is phishing going on. It's a really cool one-page poster. And again, email me at rogerg@knowbe4.com if you want to get a hold of a PDF version of this poster. You also want to let employees know what to do when a phish is detected. You want to let them know you shouldn't open and click on links. If you're not sure whether it's a phishing email, you should call the sender when in doubt. When in doubt, chicken out. You want to give them a way to report the phishing. Tell them send any potential phishes to this email address, or we certainly think it's really cool to add like a phish alert button or something like that, where they can just click on a button and it will delete the email and send it to a pre-configured email address like IT security. You can go, if you go to knowbe4.com/resources, you can download the free phish alert button and add that to Outlook and Gmail and other email clients. Again, it just, that way you can put in your training, you can customize the button to have your branding on it. But you just want to say, hey, if you see what you think is a phish, click here and we'll delete it and report it, because you do want to collect that information, because if there's an ongoing phishing campaign, like from Russia or China or something like that, it's always good for the IT security folks, IT folks to know that, hey, all of a sudden this morning we just got 100 attempted phishing emails from this Russian IP address. And if you don't have people reporting that aggregating that information to a common place, then you really, you can't figure it out. Plus, it kind of gamifies phishing. Whether you're sending a simulated phishing test or it's a real phishing test, if you give the employee a button, they're more likely to go, oh, I think it's a phish, let me click here and report it, and it turns it into a game, and it really helps improve and decrease the phish prone rate. So again, you want to make sure that in your policies, you tell your employees specifically what to do when a phishing is detected. You want to tell them to report it. You want to tell them that if they got fooled by the phish, sometimes you get fooled by phishing, what to do. You want to create a culture of acceptance for reporting possible phishes. You want to tell people that they should report possible phishes even if they're not sure it's a phish. They want to report phishing even if it's been hours later or days later after they clicked on it, if it's bothering them. You want to make sure that you tell them you will not get in trouble for reporting a possible phish, even reporting it late, that it's better to report it than never to report it. Oops, let me go back here. Here we go. Another thing you want to include in your specific phishing mitigation policies is what to do when somebody's successfully phished. What should they do? What is your company going to do? When is, if someone gets successfully phished, when is it going to turn into a full-blown incident response activity where you're going to forensically analyze the hard drive and shut down the the network or something like that? And if someone gets repeatedly phished, are they going to get in trouble, or are they not going to get in any trouble? Like, it was funny, I was talking to a company just yesterday that they got successfully phished and they lost $1 million, or it was just under $1 million. And the person that did that is still getting phished all the time. Like, they just don't get it. And what's weird is that person doesn't really even have a whole lot of guilt over it. So like, we believe in more carrot and less stick to help encourage people to, to do stuff. But, you can't just let someone continuously be successfully phished and not change your policies. We think that when people get successfully phished or successfully phished during a test, that you should offer them more and more often comprehensive education, and maybe get the employee's boss involved, or maybe sometimes you have to get HR involved, but you don't want to just do nothing. You also want to let people know in your specific phishing mitigation policies, you want to let them know what the required education is. You may or may not want to tie their phishing success rate, testing success rate to their annual review. And again, you want to have different requirements for a greater number of misses. And I've certainly talked to some companies where they literally, like, if you get phished, we fire you. That tends to be in the financial industry, and we don't necessarily recommend it, but it is strange how some people, I forget the stat, I have it in another slide deck, but it's something like, you may get your phish prone rate down to just a few percent, and I apologize for kicking backwards and forwards here, but it's something like 70 or 80% of all answered phishes are answered by like the same people. The phish prone people. They're just some people that are more phish prone. And again, you need to think ahead of time. What is your own IT department's response to a successful phish? When are they going to kick in the official incident response plan for phishing? If someone gets successfully phished, how are you going to determine what was phished? Are you going to forensically examine their hard drive? Are you going, what are you going to do? Are you going to, modify your policies and see what was wrong? Or did it get in because of unpatched software? Do you need to update your policies or training? What do you need to do to minimize further damage? If every time someone gets successfully phished, are you going to do this official incident response and everything related to it? Or does it take a certain type of phish or a certain number of successful phishes, or a successful phish against the CEO versus a regular employee? I mean, really, you want to have all that sort of stuff figured out ahead of time. You don't want to be just trying to guess and wing it when it happens. And again, you have to think about, when does a failed phishing need to be investigated? Does every ransomware event become an incident response event? Or do you simply, use antivirus, remove the ransomware, and get on with life? If you find a dropper file, like some phish dropped a dropper file, are you going to proactively look for other files, malicious files on other computers to see if other people were successfully phished? That many times is a good thing to do. You want to let people know that you're going to be doing security awareness training. You're going to let them know that it is done. You're going to let them know how it's done. You should let them know that you're going to do simulated phishing campaigns, how often that they're going to be conducted, you know, once a week, once a month, whatever it is. You want to let them know what the official training methods are, what type of content they have, who they come from, how they're going to be branded. Again, you know, just setting expectations of how that training is going to occur. You know, is it going to happen in person? Is it going to be online? Is it through posters? Is it going to be using cartoons? Is it going to be using TV-like stuff? And then generally, you want to make sure that you tell users that they should hover over all URL links if they can. Can't always do it, but they should always verify all URL links before they click on them. And again, I'll cover that a little bit more later on. You're going to tell them not to install unauthorized software. You should tell them never to give their login credentials in response to an email or a call or, I guess, a website outside the company. You know, and do you want to use multi-factor authentication when possible? Although one of my most popular presentations called the 12 Ways to Hack MFA or 12 Ways to Hack 2FA. If you haven't seen that and you think MFA is hard to hack, you should watch that. I've come up with so far 18 different ways that I can hack multi-factor authentication, and some of them, many of them, are as easy as just sending a phishing email. So if you didn't know that, go watch that talk. You know, you also want to prevent wire fraud, CEO wire fraud stuff, and we call it CEO wire fraud, but really it's any type of wire fraud, or it could be, you know, that's where you get the request from, you know, it purports to be from the CEO and goes to an employee and says, hey, I need you to wire this money right away, right now. You know, it needs to be done. And usually they'll say, I'm out of the town, or I'm out of reach, and I can't be contacted. I need you to get this money. Or it could be just an email from a bank saying, hey, we have new wiring instructions. It could be an unexpected invoice or someone saying, hey, are you not paying this money? Why aren't you paying this money? We delivered the PCs, or we delivered the printers, the printer cartridges. You know, I remember reading a little while ago that, but it was like Dell and some other huge computer company got scammed out of, it was like $100 million, you know, and you would think that a computer company would not be scammed out of $100 million. I think it's for fake Dell PCs that were never delivered. But, you know, every company is full of people that don't always know about these types of wiring fraud schemes. But what I tell people to do is make sure, and listen, if you're falling asleep on this, listen to this particular hint. Make sure to update your policy to say that any unexpected request for money or gift cards or wiring transfers or invoice payments must be verbally confirmed from the requester before you send the money. And I say that because, you know, you want to put in a safety check, you know, a safety valve, so people just aren't wiring the money. I frequently talk to companies that are out hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars from one of these CEO wiring fraud attacks that would have been stopped if they would have just talked to the person that purportedly requested it. A lot of times these requests come from trusted business partners who had their PCs compromised. It comes from, you know, lawyers and bankers and stuff that you worked before with. It's many times it's on, you know, requests for money that you were expecting. It's just that, hey, they're like, hey, I need you to wire it here. And so you want to create a policy that says people must verbally confirm that, which is kind of funny because a few weeks ago, one of my coworkers got a request from our common boss that said, hey, I need you to immediately go out and get 20 Starbucks gift cards for a public speaking event that we're going to have. And it was thousands of dollars of gift cards in total. And the person said, and you can't call me right now because I'm getting ready to go into the meeting for the next 5 hours, but I need you to hurry up and rush out and buy those gift cards. And my coworker said, hey, you know, Roger, what do you think about this request? Does this look like a phish? And, you know, she didn't know whether it was a real phish or whether it was a simulated phishing test. But I was like, yes, that it ended up being a real request that needed to be filled. But we're like, you know, someone's requesting money all of a sudden, thousands of dollars, and they're telling you they can't be contacted for the next couple hours. Nope. You know, you must stop. And we're lucky because our policies say that before someone can do that, before someone can go spend money, they have to verbally confirm it. So I would recommend that you add this to your specific mitigation policies. You need to also think about, are you going to pay the ransom or not? You don't want to be making that decision at the time, for the first time, considering what the ramifications are of that decision when you're in your first ransomware attack. And what does it take before you pay the ransom, right? Does it take one PC or one server? It's got to be critical servers. Has your whole network got to be down? What's your backup policy, that sort of stuff. You certainly want to make sure that you have a disaster recovery and business continuity plans that can continue in case your computers are shut down. You want to have a vendor risk management plan. So your vendor should not only sign your acceptable use policy, but many times you might want to at least verbally audit your vendors to see that they have good computer security policies and they know how to act appropriately in your network and with your data. And you want to have a communications plan for partners and customers so that if you were to have a event that, a cybersecurity event like ransomware event that becomes public, how and when are you going to communicate that to the public and to regulators and the board of directors and all that sort of stuff. You want to make these sort of considerations ahead of time. You don't want to have to make them on the fly for the first time while you're under attack. And of course, just because I tell you to add these things doesn't mean you should add those things. You want to make sure that any adds, deletes, changes to your policies or documentation is reviewed by management and legal before you implement and have good reasoning besides, well, Roger told me to do it. With that, I want to talk quickly about cybersecurity insurance. Cybersecurity insurance, when I first heard of this a couple of years ago, I kind of laughed. I scoffed. I think, who in the world is going to buy insurance instead of just trying to get more secure? Turns out 30% of companies now, a third of companies now have cybersecurity insurance. And I do recommend that, every company at least consider getting cybersecurity insurance, if not getting it. Right now, it's fairly cheap to get. The insurance companies are making a killing. Right now, they're only paying out like a third of premiums. They were paying out like 40 or 70% of premiums. Now they're only paying out like a third of premiums. So they're making a ton of money. There's a lot of companies out there. Over 170 companies offer cybersecurity insurance. The nice thing is that it really is overall, it's fairly low cost. It says here in the slide, 1 to 3% of the cost of most other business insurance. To tell you how low cost it is, I talked to a lot of companies that have millions of dollars of cybersecurity insurance. And they only pay somewhere between $5,000 to $12,000 a year for that coverage. Be aware there's lots of outs, like when the big was it NotPetya, when it shut down, that shut down a lot of companies that had cybersecurity insurance, and those cybersecurity insurance firms said they weren't paying because it was cyber warfare. It had come from Russia or something like that. And it really was cyber warfare, and they don't cover acts of war, and so they didn't pay it. You can get what's called first-party or third-party coverage on cybersecurity insurance. First-party coverage is, all the damages directly to yourself. For the, it could be for paying the ransom. It could be for your system failure and downtime, reputational harm. Third-party coverage is, it's when other people get hurt. They say, hey, I lost money because you were down or something like that. 2/3 of the claims are first party only, and 1/3 of the claims are third party claims. So, that's still a pretty heavy statistic, meaning that you should make sure that you have first and third party coverage, and you want to make sure what does it include. Pricing is typically many times done based upon the number of records that the company has to protect, the maximum payout of the policy of what the company wants to get. And again, most companies I know have hundreds of thousands to many millions of dollars of coverage, but the average cybersecurity incident claim was less than $57,000. It was $56,000 and some change. So think about that. Even if you have millions of dollars of coverage, usually most people aren't able to claim that much. But most insurance companies are, again, going to ask you what the maximum payout is of the policy, the number of records you're trying to protect, and then usually they're going to send you or verbally ask you to confirm a long survey of questions. They're just trying to get a general idea of your cybersecurity maturity and culture. You do want to make sure you know what cybersecurity events are included or excluded. Something I've started to hear about recently that's kind of shocking me is that some cybersecurity insurance companies are specifically making smaller cutouts for social engineering attacks. They'll say, okay, you have a $50 million policy, but we're only going to pay out a max of $200,000 if it's related to a phishing attack. Well, I'm amazed that people are accepting that particular regulation in their claim, because if 70 to 90% of all malicious data breaches are due to phishing, social engineering and phishing, that pretty much means that you don't really have a $50 million policy. You just have a $200,000 policy. And you're probably only paying $5 to $12 grand for it, but I would really avoid these claw down clauses for phishing attacks. That to me, I think is even, I think it's unethical. I think these companies are trying to, well, they're trying to protect themselves, but I just think it's unethical to give someone a $50 million policy and then say, I'm only going to give you, 1/20th of it or 1/50th of it if it's phishing related, when phishing attacks are the most common types of attacks. You want to find out, is ransomware payments included or not, and who gets to decide when they're paying the ransom, if they are included. Are CEO wire fraud events included? Are they included when an employee accidentally helps? Even though of a case where an employee actually was being sued by the company to try to get the money back. I don't know how that's going to resolve, but I think good luck to that. I find it hard to believe any court is going to hold an employee personally liable for a CEO fraud event, but maybe. I don't know the details of the case. Does your cybersecurity insurance cover intentional insider events? What assets are covered? Is it just your PCs? Does it cover your mainframes? Does it cover third-party vendors? Does it include your SCADA industrial equipment? Does it cover your events that happen through your AC? I think it was Target or somebody like that actually got compromised because their AC vendor had a built-in default password they didn't change. So they came through the AC, and that's how they took over the company to start with. If your cybersecurity insurance doesn't include your AC equipment, then maybe they won't pay. So you need to make sure to find out what assets are covered and what events. So then, now onto the more exciting stuff, technical controls. So where are we going to place the technical controls? These are things like your antivirus and your filtering and blacklisting and all this stuff. You can place them on the network edge and what's called the ingress and egress points of people getting out to the internet. Could be on the PC and the device, the host itself, or it could be some type of technical control in a cloud service out there in the cloud. You need to decide where it's going to be. And I'll tell you, I take away a bit of this. It's always good to have it on both the network edge and on the host itself. And whether or not it's hosted in the cloud or not doesn't, that to me is not that important of a decision. But you definitely want to have it on your host, because I know, you could think you have it really protected real well on your network, but if someone has a laptop or a device that they take off the network and take it home, well, then your network edge firewall may not be protecting it, probably isn't protecting it. So it's good to have it on the network and on the host. You want to decide whether it's going to be on inbound or outbound traffic or both. So if you do content filtering or firewalling or whatever, is it going to be inbound or outbound or both? I would tell you in most cases, you want to make sure you look at both types of traffic, even if you don't think you need to, because many times your company can be used for an attack on another company, or someone could be exfiltrating data to Russia or China when you don't have a business relationship to Russia or China, or they could be an insider stealing the data, doing like a Bradley Manning thing. You want to make. To me, I think you should filter all traffic, inbound or outbound and otherwise. You definitely want to have some type of malware mitigation on every host and or server, whether it's antivirus, or these days they're starting to call them endpoint detection and response. They're supposed to be these, heuristic detecting, intrusion detection devices that are better than antivirus. I just think it's another name for antivirus. But you definitely want to have one. You want to, intrusion detection on your network, intrusion detection on your host. You want to make sure you have a firewall and have it enabled. Like Windows, Microsoft Windows has had Windows Firewall enabled by default since XP Pro Service Pack 2. And most people don't even know it. So you can many times enable firewalls and have no negative events. You can get protection without any negative stuff. I'm also kind of a big fan of the Google Virus Total website. That's where you can drop off, do what's called scan on demand. You can tell it to look at a particular file or set of files, and it actually just takes the hash. I think it's the SHA-1 or SHA-2 hash of the file. And then the Google Virus Total has 70 plus antiviruses running. and you can submit a particular file, again, really not the file, just the hash of the file, and the Google Virus Total will take and run that hash by 70 plus antivirus engines and tell you how many of them that detect it as malware. Every antivirus is hideously inaccurate, no matter what they say. They're all full of mistakes and misses and some false positives. But when you put 70 plus of them together, you're going to get a pretty good, accurate answer on whether something is malware or not. And I'm going to break in this talk. I don't really call out a lot of tools, specific tools, but I like this specific tool, and it's free. If you have a Windows system and you don't do this already, I would encourage you to download Process Explorer. It was made by Mark Rasinovich. You go to sysinternals.com. It's actually a Microsoft site. It's a free tool. It only works on Windows. But you can download it and see when you run it, you can get a list of all the running processes, active processes on your system. Well, if you go into the options, file options, or just options menu, choose the virus total option, and what it will do is submit, every time you start Process Explorer, it will submit all the running files, all the running executables and DLLs and stuff to virus total, and then tell you how many of them, whether it's 69 or now I think it's 72, 74. The number of total antiviruses changes all the time, but it has most of the major ones plus dozens of ones you've never heard of before. But it will submit the hash, and only the hash of the files that are running on your system, to virus total, which is also free. So it's a free tool from Microsoft that works with a free tool from Google, and then tell you how many of those antivirus engines that are running detect it as malicious. So if you look at the picture here, you see most of them, it says 0 out of 69 or 0 out of 68. Different antiviruses, scan different types of files, so the number changes a little bit. But it's saying most of the time it says 0 out of 69. So 0 out of 69 of the antivirus engines on virus total were detecting those files as malicious. But if you look at the top, it says 1 out of 68. But one thing I would tell you is that if it says 1 out of something or 2 out of something, it's almost always a false positive. I don't know why, but this is the one caveat, that Process Explorer connected to virus total is super highly accurate, better than any antivirus engine I've ever seen, except for if you see a 1 or a 2. If you see a 1 or a 2, if you click on that number to tell you what antivirus engines are detecting it as malicious, it's almost always some antivirus engine you've never heard of in some country you've never been to. So ignore that. But if you see 3 out of something, then it's almost always something malicious. I love running this tool on my own PC. I run it. It doesn't run all the time, but I run it. Whenever I think, hey, my computer's being kind of wacky or my browser's being slow, I run it once a month for no reason. But more importantly, when I go over friends' houses, when they find out you're a computer security person, they always, oh, you checked my PC, it's been acting weird. Well, it used to take me an hour or two to figure out if their system was clean. Now I download and install Process Explorer. I carry it on a USB key. I install it and run it, and 15 seconds later, I can tell them whether or not they have something, malicious or not. It's a great free tool to play with. Also, you want to make sure that you have good email client protections. Most email clients are strongly configured, and I try to tell people, don't mess it up, right? Like usually when I find people have been compromised through email, they clicked on a file attachment or link they shouldn't have, or they'd actually disabled their email's default client protections, lowered it somehow that allowed them to be compromised. So I tell people, don't muck it up. Leave the strongly configured default email protections. They will do things like block automatic downloads of file attachments, or they'll scan them and see if they're contain something malicious, or they'll warn you, or they'll tell you that the email came from a known phishing site. Whatever. For your email client protections, my advice is don't muck up the built-in default email protections. But you want to make sure that you have strongly configured email protections. If you don't, you want to make sure your browser protections are enabled. Again, usually they are pretty strongly by default. If you have an email service provider's protections, use an email service provider, you want to make sure that they're strongly configured. Most of the time they are, but they're not always. Sometimes you have to go out of your way to enable some of the more advanced features, and I'll talk about some of those advanced features in a minute. But you always, if you have an email service provider, you want to go review the security settings and see that they're set strongly enough for your organization. One of the settings that you should always enable, even if you have an email service provider like Gmail or O365, is Sender Policy Framework, Domain Keys Identified Mail, and Domain-Based Message Authentication Reporting and Conformance. SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. If you're falling asleep here, wake up. These are 3 global phishing protection standards that try to stop domain spoofing, and you should enable these. If you do not know what these are, after this talk, you should go find out more of what they are and install them and use them. It can only help you. And basically, DMARC relies upon or uses SPF and DKIM. So SPF and DKIM try to stop domain spoofing on emails that are sent to you or sent people claiming to have sent emails on your behalf. So it prevents sender email domain spoofing. And when enabled, when you enable SPF and DKIM and DMARC, that helps you protect your domain against spoofing by bad people to others. And if it's enabled on your domain, you can, as a receiver, go verify if whether the email that people are receiving has been verified is really from the domain. So again, and I apologize if I'm being a little confusing here, when you enable SPF and DKIM and DMARC, that allows you to let other people verify that an email claiming to be from your domain really is from your domain. Sender Policy Framework verifies what's called the RFC 5321 mail from address. That's the real return email address that you may or may not see. A lot of times on cell phones and stuff, you won't see that address. Usually on PC-based clients, you'll see both the mail from address and the display from address. DKIM works by verifying the domain of the display from address. So like if you look in the example on the screen here, the Apple @service email address, that's the display address. That's the 5322. That would, if you use DKIM, would prevent spoofing of that domain from somebody malicious. And then SPF would prevent the spoofing of that reply from email address, that no reply Apple ID Cloud type stuff. They both work using DNS TXT records. So the sender configures these DNS TXT records for SPF and DKIM. And then when enabled, the receivers of emails that claim to be from you can be verified whether or not they really did come from you. And you need to implement, even if you're using an email service provider. Again, they all work using TXT records and DNS, and they work by receivers. When they get emails claiming to be from your domain, they can use SPF and DKIM and DMARC to verify whether those emails were really sent from your domain. And here's an example of how it works. So Sender Policy Framework, again, it's designed to prevent sender email address domain spoofing by verifying the IP address of the mail server that the email arrived from, seeing if it matches a list of the allowed IP addresses that were defined in the SPF record. So to set up SPF, you create an SPF record as a TXT record. A TXT record's like an A host record, but it's called TXT. So you would say something like the DNS record would literally say something like in text version equals SPF1 all, and you would say or you could say here's a specific IP address, like all email for all of our domains example.com will come from 192.168.1.1. So you're saying do not accept any email that claims to be from my domain unless it comes from this IP address. The sender must enable this in DNS, and the receiver can check and verify, look for SPF records, and see if any email claiming to be from your domain really comes from that IP address or ranges of IP addresses. Here's an example of some emails that had passed SPF checking. You can see it says SPF passed, sender IP address is such and such, and it passed. Here's an example of a failed one. It says SPF failed, and it failed either because it came from the wrong IP address or maybe it was misconfigured. Either way, it's considered a failure, bad or unverified domain. And then your email address, your email server should automatically quarantine or put into the the spam folder or whatever any email that fails the SPF check. DKIM is designed to prevent sender email address spoofing by verifying the digital signature of the mail server domain sent. So in this case, the sending email server is given a public-private key, and then it signs all outgoing emails with the private key, and then receivers can use the public key to verify if the email was really signed and sent by the email server that it's claiming to be sent from. And all the validation for all of these are usually done before it gets to the end user. So again, a sender configures a public-private key pair in DNS, a public-private key pair on their email servers or services, and then it signs every outgoing email, and a receiver can use the public key to verify whether it really came from that domain or not. DMARC essentially is this idea that you as the sender can say, hey, if email claiming to be from me fails, SPF or DKIM, you can reject that email, quarantine that email, whatever it happens to be, or you can send an email to me at my domain and I'll tell you whether it really came from that. But DMARC is essentially a command saying, if you get email that failed the SPF and or DKIM checks, this is how you should handle it. And this is what what a DKIM signature in an email header looks like. So it's a regular email header, but it includes the public key. You'll see the public key at the bottom there. And then this is what an email header that was verified. The DKIM was passed and verified. The signature was verified. So again, if you do not have these enabled, SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, you should enable them. They're not perfect. There can still be a lot of phishing done that gets around them. Or it could be that someone has compromised the domain that it's from. There's lots of ways around this, but this does cut down on sender email domain spoofing you should implement. And I want to say, make sure you don't reject emails that fail these tests. You want to use quarantine instead. There's lots of reasons why legitimate emails may fail. So you always want to put them to quarantine and not reject. You want to have content filtering on email and your internet browsing content. You should have some content filtering, spam filters, anti-phishing filters, email filtering. You want to block malicious file attachments. There's a lot of email, you want to block EXEs. People should not be sending you EXEs and DLLs and stuff in email. You want to also block outbound file links and protocols, particularly this file : ///////. Anytime you see a link with file : //////, there's a chance it could be a malicious link that ends up sending your Windows integrated password hash to an attacker across the internet. If you want to get more details on that, click on that link there, or you can download my talk, 10 ways that I can hack you from email. But just know that that type of link right there, file : /////, bad link most of the time. Also, there's a bunch of software products out there that do file attachment and URL detonation. And what they do is when you get sent an email, if it has a file attachment or a URL in it, they'll open that email or that file attachment in a sandboxed area and examine it for badness before sending it on to the end user. It's called file detonation, URL detonation, sandboxing. A lot of vendors, there's like 24 vendors that do this. Microsoft does it, Barracuda does it, Proofpoint does it, Bluepoint does it, FireEye does it. None of them are perfect, but they cut down on some of the malicious stuff coming your way. Here's an example of Microsoft's Office 365, the advanced threat protection kicking in and doing a email file and URL detonation scan before it sends it on to the end user. A lot of good products out there that do that. None are perfect, but pretty cool thing to have. Consider adding blacklisting to your email server. That is a list of confirmed or potentially malicious domains that you can then use to block email coming from them. I've also seen some organizations that block whole countries, like they reject any email coming from Russia or China if they don't have business to Russia or China. I really don't recommend that strategy because I think there's plenty of times you can get legitimate emails from Russia and China that people are going to want to get and they won't know why they got blocked. But to be honest with you, I've also seen it work. I was in a Fortune 5 company last year, and a large Russian advanced persistent threat campaign started to attack their organization, and something like over 100 of their end users actually responded to the email, giving that email their current active login name and password. And if not for the whole country block against Russia, those emails would have made it back to Russia, and then there would have been a problem. So I don't really recommend it, but I have seen it work. If you're interested in blacklisting, I recommend you go to Blacklist Master. It has a list of 108 different blacklists, and you can take a look at different blacklists and decide which one works best for you. You can also subscribe to reputation services. They're essentially like blacklisting services, but they're more intelligent and dynamic. Blacklisting, things that get on a blacklist tend to stay in the blacklist till someone tries to get it off of there, versus reputation services tend to look and be more intelligent about what gets put on their blacklist, their reputation list, and it can be taken off, and they look more into it to see if it's really malicious. I like reputation services a little bit more than blacklisting, but they're almost always commercial products. CrowdStrike has one, Microsoft Windows Defender Application Guard is one, Google has one. Reputation services are a good thing to subscribe to. You can also do network traffic pattern analysis that will analyze network traffic patterns looking for signs of unauthorized malicious behavior, like a whole bunch of files being sent to Russia or China. If you don't have business in Russia or China, a lot of vendors work with that. FireEye, CrowdStrike, Aruba, Cisco, StealthWatch is one that I like. CoreLight is a commercial version of Bro. Bro's an open source version, so you can use those products and see if you've got bad files going somewhere else. So those are all the technical controls. Security awareness training. This is the security awareness training that works. And you want to do baseline testing of your employees. So you want to send a simulated journal phishing test to all your employees to see how many are phish prone. We have literally analyzed the data across all, like 15,000 of our customers and millions of end users. And the baseline testing on average, you can easily compromise about 30% of your users. That's the average number of users that will click on a general phish test that they get. And then you want to train your users, and you want to train them, send them training content at least once a month. You want to do simulated phishing tests, phish your users, again, at least once a month. We know once a year is not enough. Once a quarter starts to help out, but once a month is like the sweet spot. Some people do it once a week, and it's up to you, but at least once a month. And if you do that, within a year, you'll have that 30% rate down to 2%. We're getting ready to update this slide. I've already seen the new data. It's got 15,000 organizations, and we're seeing our customers go from an average of 30% down to 2%. And Verizon Data Breach Report kind of reported the same results across their customer base. Probably the last thing about training is IQ is not a good indicator of how likely someone is to be successfully phished. I've seen doctors and lawyers and scientists and Nobel Physics Prize winners have been phished and phished out of millions of dollars. IQ is not a determinant of whether you're going to be able to be successfully phished. It's whether or not you've been, aware of a particular type of phishing campaign. If you don't know that Microsoft doesn't call you to tell you proactively that you have a virus in your system, you don't know to be suspicious. If you don't know that the IRS doesn't send you an email asking for your W-2 or for you to go buy green dot cards to pay off some IRS tax penalty, if you don't know, you can be phished. But if you train your users, train them, then they're less likely to be phished. I got some more emails here. We're kind of running out of time. I've spoken too much on some of them already. But the big thing is make sure you spearfish, simulated spear phishing test against your employees. Don't let the real spear phishing be tested by hackers, right? You want to be able to do simulated phishing tests. Any public information about your company or the employee is certainly fair game as part of the phishing. And you want to use a mix of general phishing and spear phishing to test and train your employees. The most common responded to fake fish is a free Dunkin' Donuts coupon. No matter who you are, apparently people really like their donuts. Make sure to give out that red flags training poster. And again, if you don't have a copy of it, email me at rogerg@knowbe4.com. It's always good to be able to give these social engineering indicators, red flag indicators to them right when they fail a test. If you have our product, if they fail a phishing test, it immediately lets them know here's the signs and symptoms of the things that you should have indicated to you that it was a bad fish or a phishing test. That's the best training, that you give someone immediate feedback of how they possibly failed something. Make sure to keep your phishing up to date, based upon the time of the year or scandals that have happened, particularly. At KnowBe4, if you have our software, you can literally subscribe to in one of the templates called Scams of the Week, and we'll automatically put the most popular phishing scams to your end users to keep them in in the realm of what's going on in current. Again, we like, the fish alert button so they can report possible fishes. That's always good to have. Make sure to get and use good data. Do simulated phishing tests, get the data about who successfully fished the most, so you can then help give them better, more focused training. I'm going to go on towards the end here. We're kind of running out of time here. We've got some real life hints, but probably the only one I want to make sure we cover for sure is make sure to help all users understand how to read URL domains and spot the dubious links. So here's like an example, Microsoft Office 365 Fish. It isn't from Microsoft, but if you look at the URL there, it says devopsnw.com. This is not a Microsoft address. You want to teach your end users that everything up to the .com or the .biz or whatever, that's what the domain is. Everything else after that can be faked. Or like here's another example from a Kevin Mitnick test fish. Looks like it's a LinkedIn invite, but if they were to look at that URL, they would see that it actually has 2 L's for LinkedIn and not just 1 L. So you want to make sure you train your end users to look and hover above URL links if they can. That will significantly help cut down on phishing. Also, I'm a big believer in doing periodic searches for logon credentials on the internet and the web for your organization and your own emails. If you don't know how to do that, we've got some, you can go to the Troy Hunt, have I been pwned, and put in your email address and see how many times it's been compromised on what websites. Or you can go to KnowBe4.com/resources and download these 2 tools, the password exposure test or the email exposure check pro test, and that will check your organization's login names to see if those login names and passwords are out on the internet and let you know how bad it is. Also, I use a password manager. There's a couple of them out there. The one that I use, the one that was recently ranked #1 by Wired.com, but it actually proactively looks at all my logins. I have 200 login names and passwords are all unique and different, but it will notify me when one of them have been compromised. Like here's an example of when I got sent a note saying, hey, your Facebook login name and password may have been compromised. You should change it. I love that proactive check, and it's one of the reasons why I love that password account tool. I don't like to tell people what password manager I use on this thing, but if you email me at rogerg@knowbe4.com, I'll let you know. We're getting to this. We only got a couple minutes left. I want to make sure we take some questions. Make sure you go to knowbe4.com/resources. Lots of cool tools and white papers there, including my 12 ways to hack 2-factor authentication ebook. But now I'm going to turn this back over to Dave so he can award a prize, and then we're going to try to answer a couple of questions.
Wow, Roger, what an amazing fire hose of security information here. Very, very insightful. Yeah, let's do our prize award right here. The winner of our $300 Amazon gift card is Ron Sprafka, S-P-A-F-K-A, from Minnesota. Congratulations, Ron from Minnesota. So let's do some Q&A here. We just have a couple minutes left. Like you said, you've got your information up there. I know you mentioned it at numerous points. People can contact you for more info. So I encourage everyone to do that. I also encourage everyone to download those handouts there that are in the GoToWebinar control panel. So let's see. First question that came in, they're asking, I'm sure you've heard this before, should you pay the ransom when you get hit with ransomware?
Oh, yeah. I would say it's up to each organization, and you should decide ahead of time whether you do that or not. I think I've heard about 50% of organizations do, but I've also heard that about 40% of the time when you pay the ransom, it doesn't work out. Usually the attacker gives you the unlock key, but it just doesn't work. Turns out, when they lock up your servers and workstations arbitrarily, that they don't do it in a safe way, what's called an atomic safe way. So it's up to you whether you pay. I think you should, it'd be better if you had tested backups so you don't have to pay the ransom. But just know that even if you think you're going to be safe by paying the ransom, it doesn't always work.
All right, great advice. Next question: why train if you can never get our phish-prone rate down to 0?
Yeah, some people say, well, I think if I understood it correctly, it's why try. If there's always going to be somebody that clicks on an email, why should you, on a phish attempt, why should you try to get it down? And that's because security is not binary. It's always it's always about trying to decrease the percentage of risk across the continuum from, being very high to some low percentage. No technical control by itself is going to be 100% effective. No antivirus is 100% effective. Same thing with training. You want to train because it significantly reduces your risk. And even if you get it down to 2%, well, that's better than having it at 30%.
Okay. Okay. Good advice. Another question here. How often should I send out simulated phishing tests?
So there's no perfect number, although we know now after years of looking what our clients do and seeing what their phish-prone success rates are, probably at least once a month. Some people go once a week, and that gives you a little bit of better benefit, but at least once a month. Anything less than that doesn't tend to work.
Okay. Okay. And then should you make those progressively harder?
Yeah, I would say that, as you train your end users in the culture to, be careful of phishing attacks, you want to start out with very general phishes and then slowly, incrementally, especially in the people that are successful in not clicking on them, add more detail and more, spear phishing-like detail to see if you can trick them. You want to basically try to bring your whole user end base into being able to spot even sophisticated phishing without responding. But certainly when you start out, you want to start out with these general phishes, phishing emails that most people should be able to recognize and not respond to, because you'll be surprised because 30% of your users will respond to them. With that said, if we don't cover, if there's any more questions you have, please email me at rogerg@knowbe4.com, and I promise to answer them. Thanks, everybody, for putting up with us, or putting up with me and my fast fire hose, rapid fire pace.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, really great presentation, Roger. Thank you so much for being on the event today. Thank you, KnowBe4, for sponsoring today's event, and thank you, everyone out there in the audience, for joining. Thank you for all the great questions. For more information on KnowBe4, give it a try at knowbe4.com.